Welcome back to We Move Through Stormy Weather, a podcast by Storm Sound. My name is Ryan Storm, and today I am joined by Jonathan Hart. A lifelong Virginian, he lives with wife and children a comfortable distance away from both Richmond and Washington, D.C., yet within striking distance should a worthwhile concert make the calendar. His primary vice is collecting records, a habit he picked up in 1990. There appears to be no cure. Jonathan has been writing songs for decades, mostly keeping to himself, but in recent years he's shared a couple with Colorado-based band Jauntee. And as of September 2020, he's begun releasing songs via Bandcamp, and find his work at jmhart.bandcamp.com. He can be found discussing the Grateful Dead and other tenuously related music as the host and producer of the Brokedown Podcast. He can also frequently be heard talking about Phish as a co-host of the Helping Friendly podcast. Today's episode of We Move Through Stormy Weather is sponsored by Eversio Wellness. Eversio functional mushrooms are here to help right now, whether you are gearing up for a show, going to sleep afterwards, or recovering and restoring the day after. With a wide range of health benefits, Eversio mushrooms help you make the most out of the moment through the ancient healing properties in their highly potent fruiting bodies. The organic certified therapeutic potency and their planet positive refill system are two of the many standout reasons that Eversio is my choice supplement. Be clear, chill, balanced, energized, protected, focused, and calm in the moment with Eversio mushrooms. Use code STORMSOUND15 for 15% off your order. Available to ship anywhere in the U.S. and Canada. Hi, Jonathan. How are you?
Good. How are you?
I'm fantastic. Very excited to have you on today. Very excited to get back in the swing of things with these We Move Through Stormy Weather episodes. It's been a little while. And, you know, you're someone I've been looking forward to having on for a while now. You know, I've guested on HF Pod a few times, and it's always been great talking to you about Phish.
Yeah, I'm excited to be here. You've been a terrific guest over on the HF Pod. We'll always love to have you on because, well, you know your stuff, man. I mean, let's start right there. It's always fun to chat with you.
Thank you. And you picked a song that we have done before on the podcast, but we are tackling two different versions. We will be talking about Stash today. For any of you fans of Shoreline 2021, Amsterdam 97, or Scott Marks, I did an episode with him on Stash in the spring. Go check that out. That is episode 22 of We Move Through Stormy Weather.
I'm a fan of Scott Marks, so I'll have to go check that one out myself.
Mm-hmm. It's a good episode. Well, Jonathan, before we get into the specific songs, let's talk about how you got into Phish.
How did I get into Phish? I remember kind of clearly, I think senior year of high school, so it'd be 1991 or 2, when, I don't know exactly. A friend of mine approached me with a cassette tape in the hall, and he gave me this tape. He said, have you checked these guys out? I said, no. He's like, you borrow this, give it back to me tomorrow. And so I did. And ever since then, I've been kind of listening to Phish.
What was that tape of?
I don't remember. No, it was studio tape. So I want to say it was a picture, but I can't swear to it.
Whatever it was worked.
It worked. And by the time I got to college the next year, I was listening to a ton of Phish and Grateful Dead. I was going to Grateful Dead shows and listening to them almost semi-exclusively, but Phish was definitely in there. And a lot of my friends were listening to Phish, and Jauntee playing really loud in the dorms at all times. And it was kind of almost completely in, but I didn't see them for a couple more years. I didn't see them until 1994.
What day in 1994?
That was October 8th, 1994, at the Patriot Center, which is now called the Eagle Bank Arena, a room that I was just in for
Taboos.
For Taboos, exactly.
Was that like crazy impactful experience for you? Did you then immediately go on tour, or did it take you a while to see them again after that?
I didn't really go on tour, but I walked out of there going, these guys are great. I knew they were great. I'd been listening to tapes. I was a lot of people I've talked to who went into their first show in that era, and they were took them a couple shows to get it or whatever, and they went back a year later or whatever. I pretty quickly went out and got tickets to see them on the New Year's run. I saw them 12/28, 12/29. And those were pretty good.
Long Bowie.
Yeah, big Bowie. And then kind of kept going until I had a kid, and that kind of took me off the road in '96 for a little bit.
Cool.
Yeah.
Why was Stash your pick for this? What is impactful about the song?
Stash is one of my favorite songs. People will, and not incorrectly, make the case that You Enjoy Myself is everything you need about Phish, or everything you need to know about Phish. But Stash is, I think, a perfect example as well. It has composition. It has tension and release kind of built into the composition, as well as the jams, which, as we'll get into with these examples. And then it has the opportunity to open up and go really deep.
And that's also something that I feel like they've underutilized. In almost 40 years of Phish, there have only been, I think, 7 versions of Stash or something that have cracked 20 minutes.
Yeah, well, that's exactly what I was about to say, which is I think there's still a huge, deep well available to them if they chose to go there. Because this song can do anything any other song can do, only better. Maybe. Ooh. Maybe not. I don't know.
Maybe. That's a bold claim. Anything Tweezer can do, Stash can do better. You've heard it here first.
But yes, I mean, Stash, just in its nature as a song, maybe nonsensical lyrics, but they set a tone, even if they don't build a strictly coherent narrative. They raise the tension of the moment, and the music suits it. And I like every doorway into dark and weird that Phish has in their catalog, and this is a really good one that's been there for a long time. I really like early, very strict, tight versions of it. Like 11/191 is, I think, a excellent example of that, where it's not really, doesn't go off the rails, doesn't extend. There's a beautiful, beautiful recording of it that circulates. That's why that one is particularly high in my estimation. It's not necessarily better than others from the era, but it's just kind of perfect. And that's not even the one I picked.
Exactly. Yeah. You were very enthusiastic. When I asked like what version, you were like this one, and I want to talk about the whole tour. So you picked 5/19/94, which is not a Stash I had heard before. Was very excited to listen to it, and I thoroughly enjoyed it. Also, great sounding tape.
Yeah.
Of this show, and to even the playing field, when only one of the songs that we're talking about has a soundboard release, I listened to the audience of both. And so also the one that I picked, which is 6/11/19, also has a great sounding audience tape. So shout out to the tapers who recorded those shows. They sound great.
Thank you, tapers, as always. They're critical to what we do, which is to mine these, the history of this band, and we just wouldn't have it. So
tell me about 5/19/94.
5/19/94 is the Silver Concert Hall, Hult Center for the Performing Arts in Eugene, Oregon. It is kind of late in their spring tour. And what is really notable about the entire spring tour, as I wanted to mention, is that every Stash from April '94 is in the jam chart. None of them are exceptionally long, but if you go back to that 11/1/91, for example, or something from that era, and listen to Stash, you hear Stash as it is written. Then you go to these spring 94 Stashes, and they start stretching and pushing and pulling, but they remain tight, like tight as drum. Absolutely astounding. I think this Hult Center one is an excellent example. I think I'm kind of have a personal affinity because it is actually the May ones, this one, and there's one from a few days earlier that I really discovered before I realized that every April show, every April stash is also on the list. So you could go to the Lexington show from 420, Lexington, Virginia. 420 has a really, really great one.
That's also the show with the Dave Matthews Band Yam, right?
Right. In fact, right after the stash, Trey says, thank you and everybody. We're really excited to be here playing with our friends, the Dave Matthews Band again. And because it was kind of a throwback show to a few years earlier when they might play tracks in Charlottesville or whatever.
Right.
That's my Virginia stuff coming through. But, the tension and release in these versions is really what it's about. It is like master study and how far we can push before pulling back. And that they not only do they collectively push, but they also push and pull at each other. And it is kind of gooey. Time never really slips. Phish is on top of it throughout, but it just starts to like it almost I think it's exceeding my words here. It's it's could put you in. It gets to almost to a raga kind of state where it kind of gets out of any sort of sensible Western sort of music and kind of goes towards more of a trancey bit, but just very briefly. I mean, we're talking about I think this version is 11:41, and that probably includes the break between that and Horse, which follows.
It's 11 and a half minutes long.
Yeah, it's super tight. It is an amazing 11 and a half minutes, I think.
Yeah, and it's cool because this is 6 weeks before they would play the version that shows up on a live one, which is one of the best tension release jams I think in the Phish has ever played.
And yet this one is quite different.
Yeah. Oh, it's so different. What's different to me is, the jam chart entry says it's like, almost heavy metal at times. And what was interesting to me is, I'm listening to it. And yeah, there's all that dissonance and all that tension building, but there's also these moments where Trey seems to be trying to push it in a major key direction, which was really, really weird to hear from my ears. I was like, okay, this is an 11-minute stash from early 1994. I was expecting just balls to the walls tension building like a live one, and this was really, really cool. It starts immediately. Trey's playing like he's right out front leading the jam as he is in that era, and he starts playing this, repeating like the gradually Phish catches onto it first, and then Mike and Page also catch onto it, and it just goes, as you said. It just like, for 11 and a half minutes, it just goes.
He gets in this figure that's, I almost want to sing it, but I'll get the notes wrong, but it's kind of and just kind of holds on that. And Mike plays a counter to it. Then he's bending at the high note of it and just kind of pushing that note. I don't know if he's using his octave pedal or if he's just doing it by hand, but it just kind of doesn't stay quite in tune, and just the way that really mess you up in a good way. I love it.
Yeah, and what's also cool about this version, I think Mike's still playing fingerstyle bass at this point. So very different vibe than what we're used to in stashes, from recent years, after 1994, basically, when he switched to using a pick. And so it's, his bass playing feels a bit more fluid. And it's just like, even in the composed section, I was listening and I was like, wow, like it sounds so notably different because of that.
Really does. And I don't think I've given that aspect enough thought. But you're right. He really, he did have a very different tone. He's still on the dock bass and playing without a pick. It was, he was extraordinarily precise as a player in this moment. And not that he wasn't later, but it, for a finger picking bass, no slapping, none of that stuff. Everything is deliberate and just very focused. The whole band is really just incredibly locked in. No wonder they decided to make a live record.
No kidding. And Trey's tone here as well. You mentioned Mike's bass tone, but this is like, peak 1994, that pure, like just like raw fire Trey tone with like the Mesa Boogie and the Languedoc cabinets and
The tube
the
screamers
original
turned up.
blonde guitar, tube screamers and the Ross compressor, like
Yeah.
the sauce, if you will. But yes, that just it sounds so incredible throughout the whole thing, and especially as he's building to the like dissonance on dissonance on dissonance towards that final peak, and when it just explodes back into the song at the end, it's like
Yeah, the release is it's ecstatic, and we could use many a metaphor for that, but it's just great. Just really, I keep saying that because that's what I feel when I hear this, and I actually have felt similarly listening to your pick, which we'll get to. It just yes, this is what I love from Phish.
Right.
I love other things too, but this is what I love from Phish.
Yeah, we all love other things too, but yes.
Yeah.
What's cool about the 6/11/19 version also is that it's a much more contemplative version of Stash. It's not straight balls to the walls. 11 and a half minutes of molten lava, or whatever. It's they're taking more time to explore. This is also the first extended jammed out Stash in a very long time. When it happened, which I remember being very, very, very excited about. It's also, I think this is also the first time, this is the first show where Page had his Moog 1, and I think this is the first time he uses it, which is exciting, the kind of beginning of that era, and it's also, the Moog 1 sound in June 2019 is very different from the Moog 1 sound that is now, because he still, doesn't really know what he's doing with it.
More time to fiddle.
There's so many knobs on that thing, and I think he had like just gotten it recently, and didn't really know the full capabilities. And we wouldn't really see it fully realized until 2021, I think. But it's really interesting to hear that dimension of the sound as well, and like Page and Mike both being so much more assertive in this jam than they were in the 1994 version.
They are. It's so this is the St. Louis first night of a 2-night run, right? The next night was the night that the Blues won the Stanley Cup, so they were like covered glory.
My favorite loving cup ever.
Yeah, it's a good loving cup too. But this is not that night.
Yes.
Instead, it's the, kind of Stash's coming home parties. All of a sudden, I remember this because of that. I remember that Stash went long, but I honestly haven't been back to listen to it since sometime that year. But I think that when I was listening to it before, I had a little glitch on my player, so I don't have tape timings to go with my notes. But you'll know these bits. They break into this kind of beautiful major key jam, and I laughed at myself as I wrote notes because I was like, "Is Page on the roads here?" I was like, "Ryan, I don't know."
Whirly.
It is the whirly there,
Yeah.
but it's the electric pianos. They're focus on them sometimes. I get them, but Phish was doing this great syncopated beat during this beautiful major key jam, and then Trey, it's funny, Trey seems to go punching buttons because he has a moment where you start to hear like a synthy kind of distorted sound, but then he flips again, you hear like the octave pedal or something because suddenly he's really high up, but then he dials it back and goes for the deep low octave, and that really deepens the groove. And that's, I think, when Page goes to the synth.
Yeah.
And this jam just gets weirder, but still very coherent.
Yeah, it's cool because you get that it's a very 2019 jam in the sense that they decide they're gonna jam it out basically, and Trey pretty much immediately modulates to a major key like that happens everywhere in 2019
so much.
He still does it now, but there's much more of an element of weird, I think, in the jams now. And this, it's like, okay, we're gonna modulate up to I don't know specifically what he modulated up to, but I think a lot of time is like, okay, we're gonna go to the fourth, we're gonna go to the fifth, hang out in that space for a while. And it's cool because 1994 one, it seems like they're like racing against the clock, like they're they have somewhere to go and they're gonna get there as fast as possible. And in this one, they're in no hurry. As you mentioned, that the way that Page plays the whirly when he hits that in this jam is just so beautiful and complements Trey's playing perfectly, and they both kind of they play off each other very nicely in this jam.
There's this bit after what I was describing when Trey goes deep in the octave where he starts doing this kind of melodic. I think he's always doing this jam, doing these melodic syncopated rhythms, but he's doing this bit that reminded me. His part reminded me of the Plinko days from the early 3.0.
Yeah.
But just him. They didn't all follow. It also maybe a little Tahoe Tweezer-ish where they're hitting the like bump bit that they that led to the woos in the Tahoe Tweezer.
Oh my God! Speaking of woos,
Woo?
I totally forgot to mention when we were talking about your version. People wooed instead of like some people were doing the clap, and some people were wooing. That caught me so off guard.
Yeah, and listening to your version, I missed the woodblocks, because the clap basically eradicated the woodblocks, which
it didn't sound like
sad.
Phish was doing it in your version as well. Maybe I missed it, but
he may not have been. That's the thing. It was in that time that people were just like the hardcores who'd been around for a couple of years. They knew the claps, but there were still plenty of new people, especially on a West Coast show, who didn't quite know what they're doing. Yeah, noobs everywhere.
Well, anyway, back to talking about the St. Louis one.
Back to 2019. Yeah, I felt like, but the jam really, it felt like it had legs remaining, and it did. A couple more, but before too long, they kind of, roar back into the proper stash and close it out. It's like 16 and change. Really great version. I still think there's a 30-minute tweezer, 30-minute stash out there to shame most of the tweezers. But this one didn't do it, but it's really good and worth our time.
As far as stash goes, especially modern era stashes, it's very good. There's a cool moment around 10 and a half minutes in where they kind of hit this space where they're still moving, but it feels like they're waiting for somebody to come up with the next idea, and that's something that's 2019 was kind of all about that. It's like, where are we taking our sound next? They hit this huge peak with their jamming in 2017 and 2018. In 2019, Trey changed up his rig a lot going into that. Fishman changed his kit. Page got the new Moog to replace the Voyager that he had really been leaning on in a lot of jams the last couple of years. So, they're trying to find this new sound, and that's kind of what happens all year. And I think that's why it ends up being, wildly inconsistent. And I think we saw that again in 2022, where, they hit this, again, another massive career peak last year. And, this year they're like, okay, where do we go from here?
Well,
And so it's interesting to track how you kind of hear that. They're not like, all right, we've got this idea that we've been working on for a few months or even for a few shows already. This is the first show of the year outside of the Mexico run, which I consider to be an extension of the late 2018 sound.
I think that's fair. I mean, Mexico doesn't really count in my book usually. I mean, great jams always it lives on an island by itself.
Do not sleep on Mexico 2019 because those shows are excellent.
I'm not knocking it. I just feel like those shows exist separate from the continuum.
That's fair.
Everything about them is different. But you could go back to Bittersweet Motel, and there's the bit in and around where the guy brings bad reviews, and Trey's like, when you're taking chances on stage, sometimes you're going to fall flat on your face. And I'm poorly paraphrasing because, this is something that they've said before, and Grateful Dead said, and people have said about these bands that when they go out there and they decide to improvise, when they break away from a composition and try to create something new on stage, sometimes it doesn't happen. And, the 2019 jams, and this is a great example of it, they give themselves the room, not just to fall flat, but the room to find a thing, which if you go back a few more years to say, the first part of 3.0 in particular, they very often just didn't give themselves a chance.
Right.
They
would just bail,
get out there. If it didn't happen, they bail. Song.
Even if it was starting to happen, they'd bail sometimes. Again, 2010 had no jams over 20 minutes.
This is where we want Phish to be, is where we are now, but also where we were on 6/11/19, is a band that is giving themselves a chance for our benefit.
What's kind of interesting is, I a couple of weeks ago, I realized that, I kind of haven't listened to 2019 in like a year and a half. And, I tend to listen to a lot of recent Phish. So I was listening to a lot of so much 2021 for like the last, year and a half, obviously, because it's so good and I just want to keep listening to it. I was listening to so much 2019 in 2020 and early 2021 because it was like the most recent Phish. And I was like, I'm just, I listened to the Camden 20 Years Later and the Alpine Ruby Waves like frequently. And I hadn't listened to them in so long, and I've kind of been going back to those jams, and I think like the really, really good jams from 2019 have held up pretty well. I think, I do prefer the Eugene Ruby Waves from last year to Alpine. But like stuff like that Camden 20 years later, going back to it, I love that jam. It's amazing. But it's interesting, to track how much of the year is just kind of like, eh.
I mean, it happens in a lot of years.
Yeah.
I listen to the Phish that just happened, and then I listen to Phish that's really old.
Yeah.
That's kind of the way I am. And then sometimes I don't listen to Phish at all for a week, which is always.
Yeah, I don't ever go that long.
I got a record problem to maintain.
That's fair. Sometimes when Goose is on tour, I'll like go like 2 days without listening to Phish, and then I'll be like, wait a minute, I haven't listened to Phish in 2 days. That's a problem.
See, yeah, my Goose is my record collection in all manner of so many other bands, as opposed to, I don't even have a 1-2 anymore. I mean, I have Grateful Dead. I guess I'm always listening to them too, so maybe I do have that.
Right, but like not a 1-2 like currently touring.
Yeah, no, not at all. There are 100 groups that are out there right now that I love, and pay attention to, and might jump on the road to go see a little bit of, but none of them are doing the kinds of things that Phish or even Goose are doing with, wildly different set lists and jams and
unpredictability.
Yeah. Very few of them, or at least.
Yeah, it's interesting how few bands, even with, kind of the more mainstream, the mainstreamification, is that a word? The more mainstreamification, I'm just gonna roll with it, of the the Dead, and people like now it's really cool to go see Dead and Co. Which is like, I every time I see someone I know who like, or like, someone I know who like lives in the US, who I know is just like they're like my age and they're going because it's like cool, and they're like, went to see the Grateful Dead.
No, you didn't.
Just like, like silently fuming.
Well, I'm not here to bury Dead and Co, but
yeah,
I will say that they're not the Grateful Dead, but arguably the Grateful Dead might not have been for a number of years either. But I focus on I have a whole other podcast where we talk about Grateful Dead, and I bring in all kinds of artists who make all kinds of music, including some who are pretty much exclusively improvisers who love Grateful Dead, don't sound anything like them or Phish or any of that. And and there's,
you mean other music?
There's this thing called other music
that exists.
And that's been kind of a trip for me, is to explore people who, many of whom use rock instrumentation and rock band setups and make music that sounds like none of these things. And I think it's the spirit, and that's, what does Phish take away from the Grateful Dead? The spirit as much as anything, the willingness to try. And and so there's a lot of groups out there doing that too, that again sound like Phish. Doesn't sound like Dead. These guys don't sound like any of those bands. It's a great pleasure, but it sometimes takes a little digging.
Yeah, and that's a good point about the willingness to try. That's like the big shared quality, I think, between all of these jam bands, big or small. Like, Phish doesn't sound like the Dead. Goose doesn't sound like Phish. But yeah, they share that quality where they're like, okay, we're gonna go out here and we're gonna see what happens. Like, sometimes we're gonna, break through, and this jam is gonna be like the best thing we've ever played, and sometimes it's gonna be 25 minutes, and it's just gonna be like, like
sometimes you push through, and at 24 minutes you hit that thing. Sometimes you don't.
Which is, Paige talked about that in the It documentary. It's sometimes, we have to play a 30-minute jam to get to those last 5 minutes.
Yeah.
I mean, and they were doing a lot of that in 2.0. And when I listen back to 03, 04, I find that there's like the first 15 minutes of the jam kind of, boring to me in a way.
Oh
They're
yeah.
just kind of like, it sounds like 2.0, Trey's doing his Oxy stuff.
Especially the 04 stuff when
Yeah.
the real problem was largely the listening. I
Yeah.
mean, it was caused by other things, perhaps, but the
Mhm.
listening. Some of this,
Yeah.
the 03, summer 03 stuff is a lot more coherent. But again, doesn't mean
Yeah, but
all of the
stuff like
jams land all the way through.
the It 46 Days, I get lost. Like I'm not
So did they.
super engaged in No, but like something like the Shoreline Soul Planet from 2021, like, it's really long, but
Yeah.
I don't really get bored of it when I'm listening to it, which I don't do very often because I always, even though I'm like listening to music for hours at a time, I always look at it like, "Whoa, it's 47 minutes. I don't know if I can."
Who's got that kind of time?
Yeah, exactly. And then I'll go and listen for 3.5 hours. But something like the Spack Piper from 04, that jam, give me minutes 17 through 25, like hell yeah. The rest of it,
Yeah.
it's okay.
I spent some time on another podcast talking about the Hampton '04 show, which opens with this massive, on paper, Chalk Dust Torture.
Yeah.
I don't need it. I mean, it doesn't come together. But then again, I was going to say, I've also argued against the Camden '99 one. So maybe I'm not
Oh my
the
God,
guy.
me too.
Maybe I'm not the guy to hype
Which
a Chalk
which
Dust.
which chalk dust are you taking over Camden 99?
I don't know. None of them. I don't think I have one. Maybe it's that I don't want a Chalk Dust jam.
Interesting.
I'll take the fee from Virginia Beach 2 nights earlier over the Camden Chalk Dust. And I was at
Interesting.
both.
You
So
were at that was the Terrapin
no,
Station
that's
show?
the '98. It was not Terrapin Station.
Oh, were you there?
No, I was not at that one.
Uh,
Yeah.
how
What are you
how
gonna do?
upset were you to miss that?
Oh, I was so mad. I was at the Merriweather show, and I went to Lemon Wheel, and
Why
everywhere
weren't you at the Virginia Beach show?
I had a professional job and a child, and I was about to take a vacation to go to Lemon Wheel. So
What did it end up being worth it to miss Phish playing Terrapin Station?
I have no regrets.
That's good. That's
I
good.
have no regrets.
Yeah,
Would I
I
like to have
imagine.
seen it?
Yes.
Absolutely. But
Well, yeah, as someone who was a Deadhead first, for sure, that must have,
yeah. Oh no, it's a big deal. But as I was saying, by the time we got to Lemon Wheel, everybody was playing it. You
Right.
heard it everywhere in the parking
Right. I
lot.
imagine. Yeah.
If you weren't hearing, whatever they called the radio station that show, you were hearing that Terrapin Station 5 times a day.
That makes sense.
Yeah, it was
Like,
okay.
I mean, especially a week after it happened, like, big deal.
Yeah, it was a big deal.
Yeah. How soon did you find out about it? Like, were people calling you
in the
like,
morning when I
yeah.
woke up? Yeah, it was all the news. I had a friend call me at some point that day, but I knew about it maybe when I got to work. I don't remember what day of the week it was at this point, so I don't remember if I went to work or if I had gone that day. It's all fuzzy. But I mean, I was online and dialed in, so I knew what was going on day to day, even if I wasn't at the shows.
Yeah.
And so yeah, I was pretty unhappy. But I
mean, happy they played it.
Yeah, it was great.
Unhappy you missed it.
It was. And look, '90s Dead. It was kind of that. It was a very much an unspoken thing that Phish had a relationship with Grateful Dead in its existence, and it used to play Grateful Dead songs, and no longer acknowledged that past. And for many years, they did not acknowledge that stuff. And '98, Terrapin Station just buried the hatchet on all of it, and
Well, in less than a year later, Trey and Page did Phil and Friends.
Right. Well, I think that was part of it. So when Phil was in recovery from his liver transplant, people sent, somebody, I say people, but because I don't actually know exactly who, sent him
Someone.
recordings of Phish. And I think that was among them.
Yeah.
And he was like, "Oh, okay, we could do this. Let's call these guys."
Mm-hmm.
And that's I without Terrapin Station, would that have even happened? I don't know.
Maybe because we know
Maybe.
they were on the Dead's radar at least because as Tom did a great interview with Brad Sands a couple of years ago
Yes.
before Under the Scales got amalgamated into Undermine, where they talked about how Phish was one of the picks to open for the Dead at the final shows at
Yes.
Soldier Field in '95, which that would have been crazy.
I mean, I would have been there. I'd have been there. I was tempted to go just because the band was the opener for those shows,
Right.
but I didn't. I didn't go. Yeah, it's funny. I normally didn't. I mean, I would go in for the openers for the summer shows, but I was never really motivated by them, except
Right.
for Bob Dylan. Didn't miss any
Yeah.
of those, or well, I missed some, but I mean, I didn't go in late when I was there.
Right. If you were going to the show, you weren't
I was
missing
in for Bob Dylan.
Yeah.
And I almost took a bus down to, was it Tampa in the spring that year to see the Black Crowes open for them. That show was kind of meh, so I'm okay with
95.
Yeah, exactly. Well, I'd seen a couple of good shows in '95 already at that point. Had fun at Mardi Gras, and I went to Philly, and I saw the Unbroken Chain, and which was
Nice.
kind of a meh show, actually. That if
But
I hadn't been
the
told,
Unbroken Chain was exciting.
yeah, well, if I hadn't been told when I got to my seat that they had sound checked Unbroken Chain and were probably playing it tonight, and here's a cool sticker for you, you're in a good section, dude. And I was, and
Spoiler alert.
yeah, I was in a good section. But then the set proceeded to unfold in it wasn't great. And then there was a good So Many Roads.
Mm-hmm.
And then
What's funny is
then Unbroken Chain. I was like, okay, I guess I'll stay.
Yeah, guess you'll stick around. It's funny, comparing the Unbroken Chain, a song that was on an album 21 years prior, or something, right? It was on Mars Hotel.
Yeah, 1974.
Yeah, so it was on an album 21 years prior, and like everyone went nuts when it got busted out. And then Phish plays "And So to Bed" for the first time ever last year. That's 38-year bust out, right? Because it was on the white tape.
Yeah, I mean,
and like I don't think barely anyone knew that they were playing.
well, I mean,
there's a big difference between Unbroken Chain and So to Bed as well. But it's just, it's funny to compare.
And that's what it comes to.
Debuting a song, or I wasn't at the Baker's Dozen, but I don't know how many people recognized End of Session.
The wise folks did, but yeah, and I'm sure a lot of people didn't. Yeah, or Glide 2 or whatever.
Glide 2, yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, I don't know. It's funny because that's a cultural similarity, right? With the Dead and Phish, we track the songs. We know their set lists are all different, and when they bust something out, we, to some degree or another, get excited about it. But Unbroken Chain was it was a well-liked tune from a Grateful Dead album, and you have to say a percentage of Dead fans didn't listen to albums,
Right.
certainly at that point. But it's also a Phil song, and we theoretically liked Phil songs, except I think plenty of people had issue with things like If the Shoe Fits or Broken Arrow or whatever. But to get that, it didn't really. I mean, to be completely honest, almost none of the versions were extraordinary or held up to the album. But that's because Jerry wasn't up to it.
Right.
That was
it's
1995.
exciting. It's exciting that they were playing it. Like, I'm sure if they played it in '74, it would have sounded awesome.
God, yeah. All we have are some rehearsal tapes of Phil teaching them the thing, probably prior to the album or in the studio. But
we can dream.
Oh, I have.
Yeah, there's lots of interesting things when like a band decides to shelve a song for a really long time for like no apparent reason. Like,
Yeah.
Why did they stop playing Here Comes Sunshine?
I walked
Never
around
know.
RFK in 95 with a sign detailing how many days since the last time they had played Here Comes Sunshine in that venue. Because at that point, they were playing it again.
Yeah.
But they did
But
not
they
play
hadn't played it
anything.
since 73 there.
3 at RFK, yeah.
Yeah.
And I had it to the day, and I crossed out the final number and added another one for the next day, carried a sign around again, and they still didn't play it. But what are you going to do? It is to dream.
Exactly. Yeah, and it's cool, because Phish hasn't done something like that as often, have a song become like a staple for a while and then not play it for 20 years, except for, there are some cases like Isabella. But I mean, it's a cover, but they still played it a good number of times in 97.
Yeah, I mean, I
and
would
then
say that's
shelved it for 20 years.
really the only kind of song that they have that they've really done that for. Short of like
Axilla Part 2.
Yeah, that was a good one but they busted that out now, so we're not looking for that. We got it.
Right, but I'm saying
So
they
Take the A
they
Train
played it.
would
No,
be
but they played it a number of times
Yeah.
in 95 and then, didn't play it for 25 years.
Exactly. And I was thrilled when I got my second one 25 years later or whatever. But they otherwise, they don't have a lot of songs like that left without doing something like Take the A Train or
Dear Mrs. Reagan.
or Dear Mrs. or Melt the Guns, please.
Yeah.
Melt the Guns. Or unpacking something like Bundle of Joy or Lushington or something like that.
The Ass Festival.
Yeah, which are really unlikely, I think. I think that they're just not. I mean, anything's possible with Phish, right? All it takes is the wild hair to occur, and suddenly they're playing Ass Festival standalone. And
or you got to remind Trey that they exist. Like, he talked about in a Phish radio interview last year how like stuff like And So to Bed, he and Axilla Part 2, he just did not remember that those songs were a thing. Like that they had ever been played. And like he said, like, And So to Bed, like Jeff Tansky reminded him of its existence. And Trey was like, yeah, like,
cool.
Why the hell not? Like, fuck it.
Or the second jam and Mike's song.
Yes, which
Thank you, Drew.
Thank you, Drew, for bringing it back twice in 2015, and then did it at the dozen. And I keep waiting. I was waiting for it all of 2021. I kept waiting for it. I was like, everything's coming back this year, and they were jamming out they're still jamming out the first section of Mike's.
Yeah,
kind of more infrequently this year, but it's still happening. But yeah, every time, it's like you can tell it's like that kind of show, like like maybe it's gonna happen, and like I'm like holding my breath as they get to the end, and then it doesn't happen.
Just enough stretch at the first part of Mike's to give you hope.
Yeah.
Like, ooh, they really want to play Mike's. Maybe they'll. Maybe no.
Yeah.
I blame Simple.
You have hope.
I blame Simple.
You blame
for breaking Mike's groove. Yeah. Yeah. In '94, Simple started appearing in every other Mike song. It then supplanted Hydrogen, and then they just kind of exploded the suite. And, over time, Mike's groove as a, bang, bang, bang 3-piece suite fell apart. And before long,
come back though.
It has. And then before long, though, the second jam fell out of it. And then, when they take a hiatus, they come back, it's gone. It's been gone before the hiatus. Yeah, but it was really gone. And then they broke up and they come back and they're learning from some old tape or the old charts. They're relearning these songs and they don't remember that they used to stay on F, is it? They don't remember that they're supposed to just hold on that in that key and make beautiful music for us.
Mm-hmm. Someday it'll come back again.
Yeah.
We can hold on to that hope. The Mike song second jam, sample is now a regular jam vehicle, which is
what the hell is that?
So strange. Like, if you told somebody in 1990, like 4 or 5, like at the peak of like they're playing sample again, like, don't worry, 27 years from now, They're going to be jamming this out.
If you told some of the people I knew going to shows in 1994 that Sample in a Jar would become a big jam vehicle in the next century, they would be mad. They'd be like, I don't want to hear that song ever again.
Yeah.
Because it was,
weren't there some people saying that about Disease too?
Oh, sure. It happens every album cycle where they're playing the new songs a little more, a little heavy rotation, if you will, to steal a Page title. Then they get annoyed with how frequently it happens. But this is how the band, first of all, they have new material, they're excited about it, so they're going to play it. But it's also how they get comfortable with that material, and that's where they find doorways to jamming.
Yeah, like that. Think of how quickly they debuted Everything's Right, Set Your Soul Free, Soul Planet, and how quickly those turned into huge jam vehicles. Like,
right. Sometimes they have to flog.
Soul Planet is kind of Soul Planet has kind of fallen off as a huge jam vehicle since 2018, but Everything's Right and Set Your Soul Free have both just have incredible batting averages as songs. Like, yeah, they may not be your favorite songs, but like the jams that come out of those, like, whew.
Yeah. No, I think there's plenty of people who hear those songs and they're like, okay, well, we'll get a jam. I'm going to run to the bathroom, and they get back and they got a jam.
Yeah,
that works.
It works. I am personally really chasing the return of the big gumbo. They finally jammed one out this summer at Bethel for 9 minutes, which I was losing my shit over. I was at camp, so I wasn't watching the show, but like I saw the next day, like the timing, and I was like, like it's happening. And then it didn't.
Well, it's a 4-minute song, so a 9-minute song. That's not insubstantial. Is it a 20-minute jam? No, but
solid jam. But yeah,
one thing at a time.
I'm waiting for something on the level of like Starlight 97.
Yeah,
well, that's a dream. That's
you could be waiting a while.
Long shot. But tying it back to our main topic, Stash. That's also a song that was very predictable for a lot of years. I mentioned I was looking at it earlier, and I forget where I was reading this, but like there have only been 7 or so versions of Stash that have gone over 20 minutes. Oh, it was in Rob Mitchum's 25th anniversary Phish write-ups, which if you're not subscribed to those, phishcrit.substack.com, they are phenomenal. Rob writes about every Phish show on its 25th anniversary.
It's great stuff.
And like lots of contextual stuff. And so he talked about how, he's obviously in the middle of fall 97 right now. And it's interesting. He talked about there have been 7 versions of Stash to hit the 20-minute mark in Phish history. 4 of them were in 1997. Which is crazy. And then it was, for like all of 3.0, except for a couple of select versions maybe, until this St. Louis 2019 one that we were talking about, it was just kind of like, okay, it's Stash. We're going to get 11, 12 minutes of, good jamming, but, not going to do anything. And then finally, it steps out of its boundaries in early 2019. There are a couple other versions shorter in that year that, kind of go out into this more major key space or get interesting. And then 2021, you have the Deer Creek version, you have Shoreline, you have Eugene, which are all phenomenal, getting jammed out. And then so it's going places now, which is crazy.
Yeah,
never lose hope.
Never
your favorite
lose hope.
Jam vehicle from the 90s that doesn't jam anymore.
It could be back. And it's funny, even Jam Charts for Stash has from 3.0, 10, 12, 11-minute versions that are acceptable. Or better. I think one of the things that gets me about so many of those versions, and actually I heard it in this one too, is that unlike the early versions, Trey misses some of the composed bits. And Trey's wrong. We do want to hear the composed bits correctly when there are composed bits. Do I care if he hits every note and everything's right? No, but that's a different song.
That's also just like chords, though. Like
right. I want to hear
Stash.
And not a clam in the middle of that.
I listen. No,
I'm not gonna lie.
2019 is not known for its execution of composed sections. Like the Mohegan Foam is like a war crime. Like it actually is.
Yeah, they
it is.
Will I trade perfect note for note playing for deep jams? Maybe. Often. I guess I do. I guess I have. But I do believe that there exists a world where they can both happen again.
2021 was that world.
There it is.
You know, they were executing it. You know, that fluff head from Nashville 2021 is just like so pristine and beautiful. It's like,
they did a pretty good one this summer too.
Yeah.
So anything's possible.
Yeah.
Including a 30-minute stash.
And that's a great spot to wrap up. I think we can all dream of a 30-minute stash, on the level of Amsterdam, coming back. But it has been an absolute pleasure talking about Phish with you today, Jonathan. I know you wanted to talk about some of your music and things before we go.
Yeah, I could do that. So you mentioned it at the top, like I have a Bandcamp, jmhart.bandcamp.com. And I mean, I've been writing songs since I was a teenager and putting some to music back then and on and off forever, actually. But I haven't really been recording in earnest, much less releasing until 2020. And so I actually put out my second album this year. It's called Slips, Trips, and Falls, and it is up there on the site. First album's also up there on the site. They're actually, I think we're in single-digit CDs available of the first album at this point, which is kind of fun.
CDs?
Yeah, I made compact discs because CDs are back, baby. Ask your parents, kids. Maybe look for that very thin slot in the dashboard of your car. But digital downloads and all that stuff. It's also on all of the major streaming sites that don't rhyme with Spotify. Everywhere but that one. And so but I don't know what it is. It's a folk songwriter-ish music, a little cosmic Americana, but I just write a variety of different songs and make it all right here in this room, pretty much with help from a few friends here and there.
Very cool. Check out Jonathan's music. Check him out on Brokedown Pod and HF Pod. Good friends at Osiris. Thank you so much for being on today. It's been a pleasure. Very happy to get back into doing these Phish episodes. I've been doing a lot of Goose podcasting lately.
Shocked.
So I was very excited to. I know, but I was very excited to get back in and go in depth on some Phish again. There will be some more We Move Through Stormy Weather episodes coming very soon. Some exciting guests in the works. So look forward to that. Make sure you follow on social media at Stormy Podcast. Subscribe on YouTube. Any Goose fans who are not aware of Always Almost There, check that out. We do day after show recaps of every single Goose show. Half the Phish fans listening to this have now turned it off because I mentioned Goose. But yes, that is going to be all for this episode. Thank you again, Jonathan, so much for being on today. It's been a pleasure. Thank you, everybody, for listening, and we'll see you next time.